When I inherited the land, I didn't think much of it. Just 1,700 acres of dirt, crops, and family history. My grandfather used to say this land was the only thing standing between our family and starvation during the Great Depression. My father called it the heart of our legacy. To me, it was home. For generations, our farm supplied everything from corn and tomatoes to beef and eggs to the local markets and restaurants. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered to us, to our neighbors, and to the entire town. Every Saturday morning, our produce was front and center at the farmers market. Every 4th of July, our grass-fed beef headlined community cookouts. Even the local elementary school cafeteria served up vegetables grown right here, from soil my great-grandfather tilled by hand. But there was one neighborhood on the edge of my property that always felt different. They called it Maple Grove Estates, a gated community with pristine sidewalks, designer mailboxes, and a homeowners association so strict they fined people for leaving their Christmas lights up a day too long. At first, I didn't think much of them. Their world was polished, neat, and tightly controlled, the kind of place where approved shades of beige were an actual thing. My world was dirt under my nails, tractors that woke up at sunrise, and barn cats that doubled as pest control. The only time Maple Grove ever acknowledged my farm was when they wanted something. Fresh produce for their exclusive farm-to-table event. Sure. Locally sourced meats for their upscale barbecue fundraiser. You got it. They needed my land. They just didn't respect it. To them, my farm was an ugly inconvenience sitting too close to their perfect little utopia. And looking back, I should have known they wouldn't stop at dirty looks or passive-aggressive complaints about that awful tractor noise. I had no idea they were already plotting to take my land. Illegally. And they definitely had no clue that the very food they relied on came from me. The first complaint showed up in my mailbox just a week after I moved back onto the farm full-time. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, even though I wasn't part of the HOA. My farm wasn't inside their neighborhood borders. Never had been, never would be. But that didn't stop them from acting like they had authority over me. Excessive noise from machinery during early morning hours. That's what they called it. Excessive noise. I called it harvesting season. At first, I laughed it off. A misunderstanding, maybe. I figured they didn't realize the farm predated their subdivision by about 80 years. I even walked over to their next HOA meeting, introduced myself, and tried to explain. This farm feeds this town, including you. They smiled, nodded politely, and very next day, another letter. This time complaining about the smell. Manure spread across the fields, as if crops grow on perfume and good intentions. It wasn't just letters. Suddenly, HOA board members were showing up at the property line, clipboards in hand, taking pictures like they were building a case file. They asked if I'd ever considered a community partnership to develop underutilized portions of the land into something more beneficial. Translation. They wanted my fields paved over with tennis courts and artificial ponds so their property values would go up. I said no. Flat out. That's when the real harassment started. Local inspectors started showing up unannounced, suddenly concerned about my irrigation system and the age of my equipment. Trucks making deliveries to my farm found their paths blocked by HOA security, who claimed the access road was private. It wasn't. It's been a county road for decades. And then came the rumors. At the farmer's market, my regular customers started asking me if it was true I was selling out to developers. One woman said she heard I was planning to build a strip mall on my own family's land. The only place those rumors could have come from? Maple Grove HOA. It was clear now they wanted my farm gone. Not because I'd done anything wrong. Simply because it didn't match their aesthetic. What I didn't know yet was just how far they were willing to go to make that happen. It started quietly, almost too quietly. One morning, I drove down to the south edge of my property to check the fence line. What I saw made my stomach drop. Surveyor stakes. Brand new, bright orange, driven deep into the dirt. They weren't mine. I never authorized a survey. I called the county office, figuring it was a mistake. But the clerk on the other end said something that made my jaw hit the floor. Maple Grove HOA submitted paperwork last month. They filed a claim to annex the southern 300 acres into their development. Annex? Annex my land? They couldn't do that. This wasn't some legal gray area. My farm had clear property lines, recorded decades ago. There was no legal mechanism that allowed a homeowners association to claim land they didn't own. I drove straight to the HOA president's house, a McMansion with perfectly symmetrical flower beds and a lawn so green it looked fake. When she opened the door, she smiled like I was a trick-or-treater. "Oh, that. We're just securing land for a future amenities expansion," she said sweetly, as if she was the rightful owner. "It's for the community." You understand. I didn't. Not one bit. Because it wasn't just the southern 300 acres. When I pulled the paperwork from the county, I saw the full request. They were claiming all 1,700 acres. Every square foot. The barns. The fields. Even the house my grandfather built with his own hands. They filed fraudulent documents, claiming my land was abandoned agricultural property, and under some obscure loophole they twisted beyond recognition, the HOA claimed the right to assume stewardship of abandoned land adjacent to their community borders. There was just one tiny problem. My land wasn't abandoned. I lived here. I worked this soil every single day. But to them, facts didn't matter. They counted on me being too old-fashioned, too trusting, or too broke to fight them. They saw my farm as a future golf course, not a legacy. They even went so far as to list my land for sale. Without my permission. I found a glossy brochure at a local real estate office. Prime development opportunity, 1,700 acres of flat agricultural land, perfect for expansion. It was my land. My photos. My address. Listed by the Maple Grove HOA. They never even bothered to tell me. That's when I knew this wasn't just petty harassment anymore. This was war. I don't scare easy. When you grow up on a farm, you learn early that quitting means starving, and my family didn't survive droughts, floods, and recessions just to roll over for some HOA bored with a superiority complex. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. A local guy, born and raised here, who knew my grandfather personally and hated the HOA almost as much as I did. "Let me guess," he said before I even explained. Maple Grove's at it again. Apparently, this wasn't the first time they'd tried something shady. They'd bullied smaller property owners out of their land before, usually elderly folks with no money to fight back. They'd weaponize fake zoning claims, file nuisance complaints until people gave up, and then buy the land for pennies on the dollar. But this time, they picked the wrong farm. My lawyer pulled every land record, every county filing, every HOA document Maple Grove had ever submitted. We found dozens of violations, illegal annexations, fraudulent filings, even evidence they'd been double billing residents for beautification projects that never happened. But the real goldmine, their food supply contract. See, Maple Grove prided itself on being locally sourced and sustainable. Their community bylaws even required the HOA to purchase a certain percentage of its food supplies for events, their private clubhouse, and even some resident services from local farms within a 5-mile radius. Guess who was the only fully operational farm within 5 miles? Me. For over a decade, Maple Grove had been buying my produce, my meat, and my dairy, and reselling it to residents at a markup through their fancy farm-to-table programs. They depended on my farm to maintain their eco-friendly image. If my farm went under, so did their precious green reputation. That's when I realized I didn't just have legal grounds to fight back. I had leverage. They thought they could quietly steal my land and erase me. What they didn't know was that they couldn't survive without me. The very next morning, I made my first move, and trust me, I didn't ease into it. I sent a formal termination letter to the HOA's procurement office, effective immediately. No more farm-to-table eggs. No more grass-fed beef for their private events. No more fresh produce delivered to their clubhouse. They had 30 days to find a new supplier, and given how picky they were about locally sourced and organic certified, they were screwed. Within hours, my phone rang. It was the HOA's events coordinator, her voice already shaking. "We have a garden party next month. We need the catering order finalized this week." "Yeah," I said. "About that, I don't supply food to thieves." Click. Word spread fast. By sunset, the HOA president herself was on my porch, trying to play nice. She brought a bottle of wine and one of those fake smiles people practice in the mirror. "Let's be reasonable," she said. "This is just a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I said. "You tried to steal my land. And you rely on my farm for every event you throw. So here's the deal. Either you retract every illegal claim, issue a public apology to me and my family, and pay damages for the legal fees I'm racking up, or your residents can enjoy imported lettuce from a warehouse 200 miles away." Her smile disappeared real fast. The next HOA board meeting was a circus. Residents were furious. They'd been promised locally sourced, organic everything when they bought into Maple Grove, and now they were learning the HOA had bit off more than it could chew. I wasn't done. I made sure the local press got wind of it. Every shady land grab, every forged document, and every fake zoning complaint. By the end of the week, Maple Grove HOA wasn't just in trouble. They were a punchline. Suddenly, it wasn't me defending my farm anymore. It was the entire town, farmers, vendors, even some Maple Grove residents themselves, turning on the HOA for trying to bulldoze a historic family farm for the sake of property values and a shiny new tennis court. The HOA thought they were powerful because they controlled some cookie-cutter houses. They forgot who controlled their food. By now, this wasn't just a land dispute, it was personal. Though it didn't just cross the line, they burned the whole fence down. And if they thought I was going to settle quietly, they clearly forgot who they were messing with. A farmer raised on contracts, county records, and generations of land deeds thicker than their overpriced HOA handbook. My lawyer didn't just file a simple lawsuit, he went nuclear. We hit the HOA with everything. Fraudulent conveyance for trying to sell property they didn't own. Forgery for the doctored annexation documents. Defamation for claiming my farm was abandoned in public filings. And just for fun, we threw in a tortious interference claim for the contracts they disrupted with my suppliers when they tried to seize my land. Oh, and remember that farm-to-table contract they breached when I cut off their food supply? We added breach of contract to the pile, demanding back payment for years they underpaid me by skimming off the top. The lawsuit alone was enough to freeze the HOA's accounts. Their precious landscaping budget? Tied up. The clubhouse renovation they'd been bragging about? Paused indefinitely. At the first court hearing, the HOA's lawyer showed up with a 3-ring binder and a smug grin. My lawyer showed up with a cart full of evidence, certified letters, land deeds dating back 3 generations, photographs, affidavits from neighbors who witnessed the HOA's dirty tactics, and even the glossy real estate brochure where they tried to sell my land on Zillow. It was like bringing a butter knife to a gunfight. The judge took one look at the HOA's flimsy paperwork and asked, "Did you even confirm this property was yours before listing it for sale?" Silence. Then came the best part. We requested a full audit of the HOA's finances and property dealings for the past 10 years. Turns out, my land wasn't the only one they tried to steal. That's when the courtroom shifted from my case to a criminal investigation. Because fraud on paper is one thing. Conspiracy to defraud dozens of property owners? That's prison time. Suddenly, it wasn't me versus the HOA. It was me, my lawyer, the county prosecutor, and half the town versus the HOA board. Word spreads fast when a scandal hits small towns, but this wasn't just a scandal, it was a revolution. Once residents found out the HOA had been illegally selling off land, not just mine, but targeting other properties too, the whole neighborhood turned on them like a pack of wolves. Elderly homeowners who'd been harassed over minor violations came forward with folders of complaints. Families who'd been forced to pay bogus fines for things like fence discoloration or non-standard mailbox flags suddenly realized they'd been funding corruption this entire time. And when the farm-to-table scandal hit the news, that's when things exploded. See, Maple Grove's whole reputation, the one they charged sky-high HOA fees to maintain, was built on the idea that they were eco-friendly, community-driven, and locally sourced. Turns out they were just crooks in khakis. Residents demanded a special election to remove the entire HOA board. People who'd never attended a single meeting were showing up with pitchforks, almost literally. They weren't just angry about the land grab, they were furious about everything. The arbitrary fines, the selective enforcement of rules, the secret deals made behind closed doors, the fact that the HOA's president had been living rent-free in a property technically still owned by an old widow they bullied into leaving. I thought they ran the neighborhood. Now the neighborhood was running them out. HOAs thrive on one thing, money. They collect dues, issue fines, flip properties, and skim off the top for beautification projects that never seem to actually beautify anything. But once the lawsuits started piling up, my case, the county's fraud investigation, and a class action lawsuit from the residents themselves, their finances collapsed overnight. Their insurance refused to cover the fraud claims. Their legal defense fund was drained within weeks. Vendors cut ties, landscapers walked off jobs, and their bank accounts were frozen by court order. With no money coming in and no way to legally collect fines until the case was settled, HOA officially filed for bankruptcy. The once feared Maple Grove HOA was now just a defunct corporate shell, drowning in debt and disgrace. With the HOA legally dead, the fraudulent sale of my farmland was voided automatically. But I didn't stop there. I made sure the county officially restored my land deeds, wiped every false lien and zoning complaint from the record, and filed a permanent injunction preventing any future HOA, should one ever rise from the ashes, from claiming so much as a square inch of my property. That land, my land, was now untouchable. I put up a new sign at the entrance to my farm. Private property, no trespassing. Especially HOAs. With the HOA dissolved, Maple Grove still needed some kind of neighborhood structure, but this time the residents were in charge. We formed a community council, not a legally binding HOA, just a voluntary group where everyone had a voice, and no one could weaponize rules for personal gain. The first meeting, held at my farm with fresh produce from my fields, burgers grilled right there, and free admission for everyone. The council's first rule, no one touches the farms. Ever. With my land secured and the community healed, I decided it was time to pay it forward. I opened my farm up to local schools, hosting field trips where kids could see what real farming looked like, not the curated agritainment nonsense the old HOA tried to peddle, but actual hands in the dirt, hard work, and honest food. I started a young farmers program teaching local teens about soil health, crop rotation, and sustainable agriculture, making sure the next generation knew exactly why this land mattered so much, and why no one ever lets a bunch of paper pushers steal it again. To celebrate the final victory, we hosted a massive feast, open to the whole town. Long tables stretch across my fields, piled high with the food I grew, cooked by local chefs, and shared by everyone who stood beside me. We didn't just reclaim my land, we reclaimed the spirit of this community. And as the sun set over my fields, with laughter ringing out and kids chasing fireflies between the rows of corn, I realized something. They tried to take my land, but they only made me realize just how much it meant. And now, I own my land. I own my story. And Maple Grove will never forget the farmer who fought back and won.